Starting this school year, every student in math is going to have a required quarterly assessment, an RQA for short. And the RQA is going to be worth 10% of each quarter's grade. So I'm making this video to show you the what can happen when one assessment is worth 10% of the quarter grade, so that when you go to take your exam or your RQA at the end of each quarter, you're not surprised if your grade on the RQA, for lack of a better word, tanks your quarter grade and you're not expecting it. So I have two scenarios here. One is a class that has three categories: a summative, a formative, and a homework. If these percents don't match your specific class, please refer to Edline to know what percent your summative grades are worth, your formative, and your homework. Notice there's no RQA category. So what has to happen for this type of class is your RQA grade is going to go into this summative category here. So your teacher is going to figure out, based on how many summative points you currently have at the end of the quarter, what number of points does the RQA need to be 10% of your quarter grade. So what I have here is a summative category that's worth 60%, and at the end of the quarter, there are 150 points. Therefore, to have the RQA be 10% of the quarter grade, the grade is going to go in out of 30. So this is going to be the RQA. So before the RQA, the summative category had a 90%. So if you take 135 and divide by 150, that's a 90% in the summative category. Let's just say this student also has a 90% in the formatives and a 95% in homework. If we calculate their quarter grade before the RQA, it's a 90.5. And here's how that quarter grade is calculated. We take 0.6 times your summative category percent plus 0.3 times the formative category, and then plus 0.1 times the percent of your homework. And if you do that in your calculator, you should get 0.905, which is 90.5%. So here's the what if game with the RQA. Because this class has 150 points in the summative category, the RQA is going to be at a 30. So what if you get an 80% on the RQA? So 80% of 30 points is 24. So in the gradebook, your teacher would put a 24 out of 30 for the last summative grade. And here's what your calculations will look like. So we have to take the 135 points you had here to start. The 135 points is the number of points in your summative category before you take the RQA. We have to add that to the 24 points you earned on the RQA. Out of the total, now 150 plus 30 is 180. So now your summative category is 88.3%. If we take that times the 60%, remember this class has a 60%, and then your 30% formative of 90% and a 10% homework of the 95%, this student now has an 89.5 for the quarter. Got an A by the skin of their teeth. So it took their 90.5 to an 89.5 just by getting an 80 on the RQA. Now let's see, what if we get a 70? So 70% on the RQA is a 21 out of 30 for that last summative grade. So we take the 135 that we had plus the 21 out of the 180 now total and summative, and we get an 86.6 for your summative category. So summative category is 0.6 times the 86% plus your formative category plus your homework, and now the student has an 88.5. And then lastly, I have here, what if you get a 60%? That takes the student to an 87.5. What I didn't calculate is, let's do what if they got a 90%. So if this student gets a 90% on the RQA, they would get 27 out of 30 points in the grade book for that last summative grade. Add it to the 135 that we had out of the 180, so now their summative category is 90, and their quarter grade stays a 90.5. So you can see an A on the RQA, or up here, what we did in the beginning, a B keeps their quarter grade an A, which they had before going into the RQA. And anything less than that, then it brings their quarter grade down to a B. We can do the same thing now. This student B, their summative category before the RQA is an 85, compared to this student had the 90. So we can do the same calculations. If they get an 80% on the RQA, hang on, let me move this over here. If they get an 80% on the RQA, it's a 24 out of 30 again. They have an 87 for the quarter, so it did not change their quarter grade much from before and after the RQA. If they get a 70%, their grade goes to an 86. And if they get a 60%, their grade goes to an 85. So you can see that this student that had a middle A, a middle B already for their summative category, their RQA is keeping them at a B level, whether they get a B, a C, or a D. You can play this numbers game, this what if, at the end of every quarter. If you look on Edline, you can see what your summative points are, what your formative category percent is, what your homework category percent is, to be able to check each quarter, what do I need to get a quarter grade of my liking. Now, some other classes have categories of 80% for assessments, 10% for homework, and 10% for quarter exam. So what happens is, during the quarter, only 90% of your grade is recorded until you take your quarter exam at the end. So here we have student A, and let's say they have a 90% in their assessment category and a 95 for homework. Only 90% of their grade is represented, and they have an 81.5 at this point. So if they get a 90% on the RQA, if they get an A, what happens is we take the 0.8 of the assessments times the 0.9 that of your earned category percent, plus the 10% homework times your homework category percent, and then the 10% from the quarter exam, which is here, times the 90% you get on the quarter exam, and you have an A for the quarter, 90.5. And we can repeat that with the 80%. So you can see the 80% changed. Now you have an 89.5. So you still have an A for the quarter. Go to a 70%, now it's at a B, an 88.5, a 60%, and a 50%. Now you can do any percent in between. You could do a 65%, you can do a 75%, and see what difference that makes if you change this number in the final percentage. Now a student that has an 85% in their assessment category under the 80-10-10 setup, going into the RQA would have a 77.5%. So if they get a 90%, if they get 100% on their quarter exam, you have an 87.5 for the quarter. It's still a B. So this assessment category of 80% is the biggest weight. So therefore, even though you get 100 on your RQA, it doesn't bump your quarter grade up to an A. And then if we get a 90%, an 80, so we can see if we get a 90%, that's an 86.5 for the quarter. So it's a B. An 80%, still a B. A 70%, still a B. let's see, a 60% and a 50%, still a B for the quarter. So again, because this assessment category is 80% of the quarter grade, that's really where the bulk of your quarter grade is coming from. This percent going in, the assessment category percent going into your quarter exam, really makes a difference. So please keep that in mind as you work through each quarter to do your best on every assessment that your teacher gives. If you have any questions about how to do these calculations, if you want to play the what if game with your teacher and use your specific numbers, please see your teacher at lunch and they would be happy to do that for you.